Water and rock were the most important materials for constructing Switzerland. Water, because it gives life and draws natural boundaries. Rock, because it protects against intruders and shows paths. Switzerland's identity is built not on a common language, but on a political ideal: freedom. The myth of Swiss freedom is based on a promise made over 700 years ago at Lake Lucerne. Three emissaries of the original cantons took an oath to fight the tyrannical stewards of the ruling House of Habsburg, and thus the Swiss Confederation was born. No foreign power should ever be able to conquer the land of the free. When the continental plates of Africa and Europe collided 25 million years ago, Switzerland's most famous landmark was born: the Matterhorn. The glaciers that surround the Swiss peaks are the last witnesses of an ice age that once covered all of Europe. But the glaciers are on the retreat. In 100 years' time, the last ones are likely to have all but melted away. The face of the Alps is changing, especially in Switzerland, where there are still 1,500 glaciers. Switzerland is lucky to be surrounded by natural borders. Lake Constance and the Rhine in the north, Lake Geneva and the Jura Mountains in the west towards France, and the Alps in the south and east towards Austria and Italy. Mountains and waters form protective barriers for cities like Basel, Geneva, Zurich, Lucerne, and the federal capital of Bern. In the past, people believed that ghosts lived on the peaks. Many were afraid of the mountains and did not want to settle there. Even among animals, only survival experts like ibex are able to endure them. Sparse areas of grass above the tree line are enough for them. Up to 20 animals live in a herd. Hunting ibex is forbidden in the Swiss National Park. They no longer have any natural enemies, except for nature itself. Harsh winters control their numbers in a cruel way, with many animals starving to death or dying in avalanches. Like the ibex, people try to defy nature and go everywhere, even to places that are difficult to access, such as the northeast ridge of the Eiger. "30 mountaineers can be accommodated in the Mittellegehütte and 12 in the shelter below. People began to settle in the Alps as they looked for available land suitable for agriculture and cattle breeding. Shepherds already crossed the main Alpine ridge in Roman times. Julius Caesar mentions a mule track in his writings. At the end of the zigzag mountain road, a famous gorge awaits travelers. The Romans carved an 8-kilometer-long road into this rock, the Via Mala, the bad road. However, it only became bad in the Middle Ages, when it stopped being maintained. The picture chronicles of this time seem like comics. They show how the Swiss got their reputation. Envious and quarrelsome, they enjoyed fighting. They were the best soldiers of their time. The mercenary troops of the wealthy cities were particularly feared. They ensured that the Confederates were able to fend off all invaders during the Middle Ages, the Burgundians and the French, as well as the Habsburgs. Murten still has its ring wall and bears witness to the influence of the Zähringers, a Swabian noble family. The Zähringers had a meteoric career as city founders in the Holy Roman Empire. A lack of offspring meant that they suddenly disappeared from history. For the picture chroniclers of the time, it was a clear case of murder. Snake poison is said to have brought down the Zähringer princes. The river Saane marks a Swiss language boundary, the so-called Röstigraben, or roast potato trench. French is spoken on the western side, and German to the east. Freiburg is the largest Gothic city in Europe. A few kilometers behind Freiburg, the Saane flows into the Aare. In the Middle Ages, Bern grew on the banks of the Aare to become a pugnacious competitor that repeatedly brought trouble to Freiburg. The Bern Chronicle tells the story of its construction in great detail. Although there were already printed books, the rich Bernese could afford handwritten manuscripts to tell the story of their city. Like Freiburg, Bern was built into a river loop for better protection. When the Zähringers died out, Bern, unlike Freiburg, took advantage of the opportunity and placed itself directly under the emperor. As a free imperial city, Bern enjoyed privileges such as the right to mint coins and to hold court. The city was authorized to govern itself and elect a mayor. The Aare protected against attackers, but also facilitated the shipment of goods. Bern became rich through trade and invested its profits in land, or conquered it. Bern grew and grew. It outstripped German Hanseatic cities like Lübeck or imperial cities like Frankfurt. Little Bern on the Aare became a great power. Its territory extended as far as Lake Geneva. The Bernese loved their Aare. In summer, thousands cool off in the glacial river. They simply let the current carry them. They keep their clothes for the way back dry in a plastic swim bag, known as a Fischli-Sack. Bern has been the capital since 1848. Eastern Switzerland and Lucerne opted against Zurich. So Bern became the seat of the federal parliament. But to this day, many Swiss still won't call Bern their capital. It's a matter of principle. To them, federal city sounds better than capital. The rise of the city of Bern was at the expense of the Habsburgs, who ruled in Austria, Spain, and the Netherlands. The only place they couldn't hold their ground was their ancestral homeland of Switzerland, except for a small enclave in the lower Engadin, Tarasp, their last bastion in Switzerland. The dispute began when Bern refused to pay imperial taxes to the new king, Rudolf of Habsburg. As a punishment, he had the city on the Aare besieged. Rudolf wanted to force the payment, but the city withstood the siege of the imperial knights. In the Battle of Laupen, Bernese soldiers once again defeated the empire and destroyed the army of the Austrian king. After the victory, they said, "God has now become Bernese." At Sempach in 1386, the Habsburg Knights were completely humiliated by the United Confederates. The Imperial Knights were doomed by their smart but impractical Poulen shoes. Bernese Landskenets collected the cut-off points as trophies. The Habsburgs withdrew from Switzerland after the defeat at Sempach and lost their followers. Their ally Freiburg had to cede large parts of its estates to Bern. Switzerland's largest city spreads out at the northern tip of Lake Zurich. Zurich has always been in competition. Instead of power and splendor like in the Middle Ages, today it is all about tax rates and quality of life. Ticino is far ahead in terms of quality of life. Morcote on Lake Lugano is proof that dolce vita, sweet idleness, is also possible in Switzerland. Morcote, the southernmost town in Switzerland, was once an important transshipment center for goods en route to Italy. Geneva has made a career as the capital of diplomacy. But the city is best known for the 500 liters of water that shoot out of the lake every second. The fountain was originally built as a pressure relief valve for the machines of jewelers and watchmakers. Crowned heads felt at home in 19th century Geneva. In 1898, the Empress of Austria, Sissi, stayed in a suite at the Hôtel Beau Rivage under a false name. The next morning, she wanted to take a steamer across the lake towards Montreux. But on the way to her ship, the Genève, the Austrian Empress was stabbed to death with a file by an Italian anarchist. In the 19th century, Switzerland started to attract more than just the upper crust. The call of the mountains also reached people who were discovering a new passion: traveling. They reached for the remotest valleys and made Zermatt on the Matterhorn what it is today. In the mid-19th century, the Mattertaler were destitute, but despite the most primitive conditions, Romanticism drew well-off Englishmen to Valais, or Vallis to the Germans. Mountain peaks became dream destinations, especially the Matterhorn. In 1863, an Englishman offered the first package tour through Switzerland from Geneva. "62 paying guests set off on an arduous journey through Valais and the Bernese Oberland, including 31-year-old artist Jemima Morel. She kept a diary for an English Alpine club, a good advertisement for Thomas Cook. The tour operator was looking for new destinations. Switzerland was a risk for him because traveling was no fun there. It was often only possible to travel by mule or on foot. Everyone in the group complained about it, but their enthusiasm about what they saw was boundless. A new world that they knew only from poems, books, or paintings, and from their dreams. Not all of them followed in the footsteps of the poets. Not all of them came to relax. Just like today, a special group was looking for adventure on the mountain. The 19th century saw the birth of mountaineering, and once again the English were the driving force, backed by local mountain guides. Together, they conquered one summit after the other, places that people once regarded as taboo and a refuge for evil spirits. Switzerland is home to 48 giants at over 4,000 meters above sea level. In 1865, all of them were conquered except one, His Majesty, the child of the two continental plates, the Matterhorn. The way up is littered with rocky ridges sharpened over millennia by glacial ice. One rope team after the other failed. The first ascent, an unprecedented disaster. On the 13th of July 1865, Englishman Edward Whymper ventured out from Zermatt. This attempt had to be successful at any cost, because competitors on the Italian side were setting out too. It was Whymper's 8th attempt at climbing the Matterhorn. Whymper's rope team consisted of 7 men, mostly British. The devout Reverend Hudson was a well-known mountaineer. He was the first person to climb the Dufour Peak, the highest mountain in Switzerland. 2 of the best mountain guides secured the rope team. Peter Taugwalder from Zermatt and Michel Croz from Chamonix. The ascent took over 30 hours, including a night in a tent. The British triumph came on the second day at 1:45. The Italians only reached the summit 3 days later. But the British victory ended in tragedy. On the way back, 4 men fell to their deaths, including the cricket star Douglas Hadow. As a newcomer to the mountain, he was the weakest link in the rope team. Hadow slipped and pulled 3 others along on the rope, including his mountain guides Cross and Reverend Hudson. Jubilation and shock on one trip. Even today, the Matterhorn is considered the most dangerous summit in Switzerland. Over 500 mountaineers have lost their lives here. Some are still missing today. While men were able to conquer the Alps, it was considered unseemly for women to exert themselves in the mountains, or even climb in trousers. In 1907, women still had to wear long skirts. Female mountaineers usually set off in skirts and only put on trousers for climbing when they felt safe with the rope team and strangers were out of sight. Just 6 years after Whymper, the first woman conquered the Matterhorn. Briton Lucy Walker. The skirt question was also a problem for her. Adventure sport in the mountains is worth billions as a business, and it needs new records every year. So, despite their development, the Alps have remained a land of adventure for thrill seekers. If you are looking to test your own limits, then the Eiger in the Bernese Oberland is the right place for you. Over 30 routes lead to its summit, with the hardest on the north face. Until 1938, the so-called Moordwand, murder wall, was considered to be invincible. Today, speed climbers need just 3 hours in good weather, on a path prepared for climbers. Especially the northern escarpments can be subject to rapid drops in temperature. In summer, the temperature felt on the north face can fall by 20 degrees Celsius within a few minutes. One million people visit the sunny side of the Eiger every year. This number is thanks to the rack railway that was built at the foot of the massif, under circumstances no less dramatic than the battle for the north face. Italian workers drilled blast holes into the rock around the clock. A dangerous task. Shortly after construction began, 6 of them died in an explosion. Hydroelectric power stations supplied electricity to the construction site. The breakthroughs to the outside were particularly spectacular. Here, open-air seats for a rock gallery were being created in the middle of the rock face. There was a post office for postcards. The station in the mountain even had a few bedrooms for tourists. If you were brave enough, you could even access the glacier below the balconies via a flimsy ladder made of wooden slats. Sleigh rides were offered, and in summer there was a via ferrata for the particularly intrepid. Today, a climate station sits enthroned on the Jungfraujoch. This is where the main weather divide of the Alps runs. Visitors to the Jungfraujoch are mainly Arabic, Chinese or Hindi speakers, and one wonders what attracts them here of all places. Helicopters are a common sight in the mountains. Switzerland has organized its air rescue perfectly, even for livestock. A dairy cow has been injured by falling rocks. She can no longer walk, and there is no way of getting her help by road. She would have to be slaughtered on the spot as an emergency if it weren't for the air rescue services. One in 3 Swiss citizens, including many a mountain farmer, is a member of the Air Rescue Service. They pay just 70 Swiss francs per family per year as a so-called patronage contribution that insures them and their livestock. The dairy cow has already given birth to a calf this year, but she has never flown before. The flight is not dangerous for her, but it's not clear how much she enjoys it. And hikers underneath her might also get their share of the adventure. After just 2 minutes, they reach the nearest road, where the transporter is waiting. Another flight assistant takes care of the cow until the farmer can drive her to the veterinary clinic. The main work of the pilots is to supply huts, like the Concordia hut in the Bernese Alps. It is accessible from the Alps Glacier via 400 steps. The steps must be extended further and further down because the glacier is disappearing. When its pressure decreases, the access routes become dangerous. Rock slips or crumbles away. At over 20 kilometers in length, the ice stream still seems mighty, but its power is also waning. With its moraine track, the Unter Glacier in a neighboring valley already looks battered though. It is the source glacier for the Aare. The hut above the glacier is hardly visible and can also be reached via steep face ladders. There are more than 500 rungs to master between the glacier and the hut. Experienced climbers will reach their goal after half an hour. Less experienced climbers will need a rope and much more time. Sometimes they suffer a mental block and are unable to take another step. This requires an emergency rescue from the ladder by helicopter. This hut owner also has to extend his via ferrata downwards every year by 20 to 40 rungs. On hot summer days, 17 degrees Celsius are recorded at an altitude of 3,000 meters, which no glacier can withstand for long. In July, the fresh snow from winter has usually melted away due to global warming, so the protective snow cover is missing. There is nothing to prevent the sun from melting the ice and destroying the frozen world. Melting glaciers reveal secrets within. Even dead people who have been preserved in the ice for decades or even centuries come to the surface. The Gauli Glacier, on which this rope team is traveling, also holds a secret. On the 1st of September 1939, Germany attacked Poland and the Second World War began. Switzerland mobilized on the very same day. Shortly afterwards, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were under arms. If the Germans attacked, the Swiss intended to retreat to their mountains. The threat united the people. But Hitler didn't intend to conquer the country. The Nazi regime preferred to do business with neutral Switzerland. Metals essential to the war in exchange for coal, or weapons technology in exchange for gold. Even melted gold teeth of murdered Jews ended up in Switzerland. When it came to the Jewish question, Switzerland was always close to Germany. Jews were not acknowledged to be politically persecuted, for example. This made it easier for border guards to send refugees back to Germany. For many, this meant certain death. The Allies increasingly questioned Switzerland's neutrality. As if to confirm this, their bombers penetrated airspace closed to them. As the weekly newsreel reports, on the 4th of March 1944, incendiary bombs were dropped on Swiss territory. In Zurich, several human lives were lost. In Basel, the area of a freight station was hit hard. Officially, any bombing of Switzerland was declared an accident, but there were Allied plans for an attack on the railways. On the 1st of April 1944, Schaffhausen am Rhein paid its tribute to the war. The US bombers were in fact supposed to fly to the German city of Mannheim. The pilots had probably confused the two cities on the River Rhine. Thanks to its neutrality, Switzerland survived the Second World War better than all its neighbors. But its relationship with the victors of the war was shattered and marked by mistrust, even long after it had ended. Decades later, a memory of the post-war period has been emerging from the Glacier. In 1946, a DC-3 Dakota was on its way from Munich to Marseille with senior US officers and their families on board. After an emergency landing, the pilot was able to set off a mayday call, but he did not know where he was. A large-scale search operation in the French Alps was deployed unsuccessfully. The stricken American plane has been discovered following a frantic 4-day search throughout the whole of the Western Alps. Here it lies, between huge crevices on the Glacier, filmed from a Swiss C-36. The rescuers were running out of time. At the end of November, the temperatures up here dropped to minus 15 degrees Celsius. They had been looking for the plane for 4 days, but not in Switzerland. Airspace there was still closed to American military pilots. Switzerland made an exception for the rescue operation, and the Americans were allowed to drop blankets and food. But their packages landed far away and in crevices. The terrain was dangerous. it was unclear how the injured were supposed to be rescued and what their situation was. Two Swiss military pilots, who had in the past already landed on snow with their reconnaissance aircraft, had yet another idea. The next morning, a Fieseler Storch from the Swiss flying squad at Unterbach attempts to land in the snow below the abandoned Dakota, on a spot designated by the rescue teams. The incredible becomes possible, and now the rapid rescue of the passengers is within reach. The 12 casualties, including General McMahon, his wife and his 11-year-old daughter, have bravely endured 5 torturous nights in the oppressive, icy silence. Not all seem to be equally exhausted. We're at 2,800 meters altitude. Will the exceptionally bold takeoff in the snow be successful? The aircraft glides. She's airborne. The takeoff was successful. We're coming. All 12 casualties arrived safely in the valley. The miracle of the Gauli Glacier was the birth of Swiss air rescue. Not only were 12 people saved, but also the reputation of the country. After this spectacular heroic act, Switzerland was likable again, and trust was also restored in the USA. In 2018, one of the 2 engines came to the surface with a dented propeller, along with parts of a wing. The cockpit and a lot of passengers' luggage is still stuck in the glacier. Glaciers are important freshwater reservoirs. Even distant cities like Munich or Milan live on mountain water from the Alps. But if rain and snow are no longer stored as ice, the precious water could become scarce in summer. The Trift Glacier has also vanished, and with it, the new Trift Lake, which was created from its water. Just 30 years ago, the ice reached up to the suspension bridge. The suspension bridge is both famous and notorious. It becomes a challenge in strong winds. But alpinists won't be able to enjoy this test of courage for long. The bridge is to be replaced by a towering concrete dam. The Trift Lake should be able to store its water from the year 2030. And in addition to drinking water, it is also planned to supply electricity for over 30,000 households. There are hardly any natural valleys left. Even the Albula was supposed to get a reservoir on its way to the Hinterrhein. The plans were only abandoned after a long struggle. Reservoirs are essential for supplying many people with drinking water and electricity. But how much nature is still to be sacrificed to supply the cities? For others, dams are masterpieces of technology. The dam of Lago di Lei belongs to Switzerland, the lake itself to Italy. The Reno di Lei is the only river in Italy that flows into the North Sea, via the Rhine through Switzerland. The mountain river Francesca in Ticino, on the other hand, ends in the Mediterranean. On its way there, it is retained to a height of 220 meters in front of Lake Maggiore. The dam was made world famous by the James Bond film GoldenEye. Today, the brave can reenact the stunt from the film. Adrenaline flows abundantly in the mountains. Lauterbrunnen in the Valley of Death, for example, is a hotspot for European base jumpers. The place is nicknamed Valley of Death because of the rescue planes that regularly fly there when jumpers pull the ripcord too late. There are also new challenges for mountaineers. The Chingelhöhne are a popular climbing spot for slackliners who perform balancing acts above the abyss. The first step is the most important. A thin rope secures the athlete. Where nature is in command, great new things often emerge. In the Chingelhöhne range near Flims is the gaping Martinsloch, a window in the rock 15 meters in diameter that was created by a rockfall. The Rhine Gorge was also formed after a landslide. 10,000 years ago, thousands of cubic meters of rock, 10 times the mass of the Matterhorn, thundered into the Vorderrhein Valley. Over the following millennia, the Rhine had to find a new way through the backfilled valley, millimeter by millimeter. This has created a gorge of rare beauty. The Rhinalta, as it is called in Rito-Romanic, is now up to 400 meters deep and popular with rafters. The Rhaetian Railway also runs through the gorge. Its route has to be repaired again and again, because not only can the river bring surprises, the mountains also never rest. Perhaps the most beautiful train route in the Alps runs between St. Moritz in Switzerland and Tirano in Italy. This is where the Bernese and Glacier Express run. It is the highest railway line in Europe. Passes and gorges, glaciers and torrents, mountains and narrow passages. Nature has built Switzerland from rock and water. In Schaffhausen, the Rhine has all the wildness of the mountains and gets to show where it comes from one last time. The boats fight against the spray to take visitors to the Middle Rock. On days like these, they have to turn back, as nature shows who's in charge.